Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 189 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello, everybody. We're a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And today we'll be talking about the conference championship games and the resulting playoff rankings for the National World of College Football and how that's all going to play out here in this upcoming postseason. And we also have a lot of news about Nebraska football. As it turns out, after we record our last podcast, the floodgates kind of opened in terms of news there. So there's a lot to get to today.
Right. Yeah, I think we can call this, instead of college football, chaos football.
That we'll change our name. There you go.
Exactly.
All righty. Well, we're going to stick with our tradition, open up a cold beverage here. I got myself one of my last Japanese Sapporo beers.
Well, and I am trying to clear the fridge, and I'm not a big IPA drinker, but I'm going to be drinking a Watchman IPA from Empyrean Brewing Company in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a beer. It's a local brewery from Lincoln. So, in honor of us going to a bowl game, I'm going to cheers to a Lincoln brewer.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers, son.
So as we mentioned, we'll save the conference championship talk for the second half of the podcast. We'll dive into the Nebraska stuff first.
Right.
And as I mentioned, there's been quite a few different things that have gone on. So we'll kind of divide into sections here, starting with the coaching changes and commitments and things like that. So we kind of got a surprise after our previous podcast that Tony White, our defensive coordinator, would be leaving for Florida State and to coach there as a defensive coordinator. And the defensive line coach, Terrence Knighton, is joining him in that endeavor. We also had our wide receivers coach, Garrett McGuire, leave as well. So lots of departures on that side of things. But we also did get some commitments as well, such as Dana Holgerson is signed for a 2-year contract as our offensive coordinator. And Marcus Satterfield, somewhat surprisingly, has said that he's going to stay as our tight ends coach rather than leaving to go be an offensive coordinator elsewhere. So let's start with those group of announcements. What is your reactions?
Okay, so my reactions, Alex, is going to be that we have been anticipating that Tony White was likely to get an opportunity to be a head coach. And, there was a lot of discussion around him last year after the season. And so I think most people were mentally prepared that Tony wasn't going to be back for next year, right? But we also thought that it was likely that he would stay through the bowl game because not all the head coaching jobs, that carousel is still just kind of opening up, right? But then he pulled a fast one on us and chose instead to take basically a lateral move, remain a defensive coordinator, but leave Nebraska and head down to Florida State. Now, that's a bit of a head scratcher. There's a lot more to the story than we know today, and I don't know that we'll ever really know what his thinking is. Rule's statement to the media was basically that Tony had indicated to him that he wanted to get closer to family in Florida for some reason, and I don't know what that means or what that implication is. I didn't even know he was from the Florida area, but bottom line, that's what Coach Rule said.
Right.
And then Terrence Knighton, who is our defensive line coach, has done a good job for us. So I think surprisingly decided to follow Tony. Now he's only been a coach under Tony for 2 years, the 2 years they've been at Nebraska together. Right.
Right.
And prior to that, Terrence's whole coaching tenure and history had been tied to Coach Rule. Now, maybe he was just looking at it and saying, most coaches coach under a variety of different coaches over their careers. So he needed to branch out. So he saw this as his opportunity to leave. That it could be that simple, but it almost seems like there's something else going on there with regard to those defensive coaching position changes.
Yeah.
The other one, Garrett, um, he is he was basically being kind of shoved aside, and he was going to remain as a wide receivers coach, but he was going to be maybe like an assistant wide receivers coach, for lack of a better term, because our new offensive coordinator, Dana Holgerson, wanted to bring in his own guy. And so Garrett was initially going to accept that pseudo demotion, and just wait his time out. But then his dad came and immediately offered him an assistant wide receivers coach job, full bowl, down at Texas Tech. So he left and went to work for his dad. So that's why Garrett left, because everybody thought Garrett was going to stay through the bowl game.
Right.
But then his dad came in and immediately offered him a job.
Yeah, well, I have two comments on the Tony White thing. I also saw Rule's comment about family being the main reason he wanted to leave to go to Florida State, which I can totally buy. Though, is it so urgent that you needed to leave before the bowl game? That's the part that's a little odd to me.
Yeah.
And secondly, you mentioned how it seemed like it was likely that he might leave after this bowl game regardless. But to me, we had kind of speculated earlier in the year that, he wouldn't necessarily get as many head coaching offers as he did at the end of last year because, we had a few more defensive struggles this season. We saw some of our opponents start to kind of learn Tony White's system and try to kind of coach around it. So we didn't necessarily have as great of success on that side of the ball this year. And he left not to be a head coach, but to be a defensive coordinator. So it's more of a lateral move for him. It's not an upward step in his career per se. So those are the things that stand out as a little odd to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's going to go to work for a head coach that just experienced a horrific underperformance year, and in which he basically is, tearing down his coaching staff and rebuilding it from scratch practically, most likely to save his own job, right? Because he went from being, undefeated regular season last year to being not bowl eligible this year, on a year when he was picked preseason, top 15, top 10 by most people. So he is effectively way closer to being on the hot seat than Matt Rule. And if he were to not put together a rebound season next year, after having made all these changes to his staff, then it might very well be that that's a 1-year run for Coach White before he finds himself out on the street. So nothing from a career development standpoint kind of seems obvious in this decision making. Okay, that seems a little bit odd to me.
Yes, I would definitely agree. Now the news about Dana, staying as offensive coordinator, not super surprising. I was happy to hear that. And Marcus staying as tight ends coach, that did surprise me. I know you also expected him to leave.
Oh, and I still do. Alex, I think that is Marcus recognizing that, number one, no one's likely to offer Marcus an offensive coordinator job right now, right out of the blocks here, after a 2-year stint at Nebraska, in which he took a lot of heat for being part of the problem rather than part of the solution as far as our underperformance on the offense, right? So I don't think, his stock, so to speak, as a coordinator is all that high. So I think it's pretty easy for him to read the tea leaves on that, right? I think Coach Rule is doing him a great favor by keeping him on the staff as opposed to immediately firing him, like, for example, Wisconsin did, right? Wisconsin also made a change at offensive coordinator, but they fired their guy and then just promoted an associate, or an assistant of some sort, to come up to the coordinator role, right? So I like how Matt Rule has handled it, and then it gives Marcus Satterfield the opportunity to seek employment. I'm sure he'll be actively pounding the pavement, so to speak, during the coaches convention, around national championship game, there's usually a coaches convention, and so he'll be down there, passing out his resume. So it won't shock me at all if, say, by summer, Satterfield is no longer on the staff. But if he does remain, that's okay too, because now he's got the very focused role of coaching tight ends, and he's done that for a number of years, and he's comfortable with it. I think he's pretty good at it.
Right. Now, in terms of new coaches, we already do have a replacement at wide receivers coach. We have Dakiel Shorts Jr. as a wide receivers coach from Kentucky. And then John Butler within our staff has kind of been promoted to temporary defensive coordinator for the bowl game. Obviously, Rule is looking for a full-time replacement there, though John is a definite candidate for that full-time role. And then it was also announced that Philip Simpson is returning to the Nebraska staff as a outside linebackers coach.
Right, and he was in kind of a support role previously, and now is coming back as a full-time, assistant coach.
Right. But yeah, do you have any strong feelings on, those three coaches?
Well, so number one, the Simpson, right, the linebackers coach, he has obviously has history with Coach Rule. He has always been known as a good recruiter. And so he brings that to the table for sure. And a pretty darn good coach when he was here. When he was asked to kind of step in and contribute, he did a good job. And he's somebody that I think Rule really feels comfortable with. So I feel good about that choice. I don't have enough direct history with him to say, oh yeah, he's coached X, Y, and Z players and they were all great or whatever. So I think that's a TBD, but I think it is definitely a good, comfortable hire. I'm a little surprised that he went ahead and made that hire before designating who the coordinator is. You would have thought he might have left that job open to allow the new incoming defensive coordinator, if it's not Butler, to choose that coach. Right. So I find that a little interesting. And what that suggests to me is maybe some of the underling staff, the assistant coaches, if you will, in this new structure where you can have as many coaches as you want, those guys must not have been ready to step in and take over in the linebacker coaching role. You know what I mean? Like there's something was missing there. And it's really, he's adding a coach, not taking anybody away. This guy Simpson is not replacing our defensive line coach. That position is still open.
Right.
Follow me?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Rob Dvorak is still our main Dvorak is still our main linebackers coach.
Mm-hmm. And so Simpson is going to kind of work hand in hand with Dvorak, and maybe now Dvorak can focus more on the inside guys while Simpson focuses on the outside guys. And so it gives a little bit more of a division of labor. And as we see things go forward, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Like you're going to see, cornerbacks and safeties, get separated into two different coaching positions, and maybe even, strong side corners and weak side corners having different coaching. So all these different roles on the team are going to start getting a lot of specialized, focused attention that didn't used to be allowed by the NCAA. Right. So that's going to be interesting to see. And Butler was a defensive backs coach. He was our what did he coach this year? He coached defensive backs, but I don't think he coached all the defensive backs. I think he just did corners. So it'll be interesting to see. Rule kind of painted the picture that this is a little bit of a dry run for Butler to see how he does in the defensive coordinator chair. That's a little bit unfair given the other things that have happened to Nebraska's defense since these announcements were made. But clearly Butler is one of the key potential choices for linebackers. And he has a history of being a defensive coordinator at the NFL level. He has a history of being a great defensive backs coach in NFL, where they had the best secondary in the NFL for multiple years under him. So he clearly knows how to coach. Now, how he is as a defensive coordinator, he wasn't a successful defensive coordinator at the NFL level necessarily, but he wasn't bad either, right? His head coach got fired. Ironically, the coach he was working for at that time was a guy by the name of Bill O'Brien, who is the head coach of the Boston College now. So he is going to be preparing for his old boss.
That's fun. To clarify, John Butler was a secondary / pass game coordinator coach. So assistant coach of the secondary pass game coordinator. That was his old role. And I also want to mention, it's good to hear that Philip Simpson is a good recruiter, because I know Terrence Knighton, that was one of the things that made him valuable, was that he was a great recruiter, and we're losing that aspect.
Right. Well, and the wide receivers coach that we got is Dana Holgerson's right hand man. That was the one guy that when he and Rule discussed him becoming coordinator on the offense, he said, "This is the one guy I need. I need this guy." And so Rule was prepared to hire that wide receivers coach and then keep Garrett on because of his longstanding relationship with Garrett's dad, Joel. But then Joel went ahead and hired his son anyway, and kind of took care of the problem, so to speak. But this coach from Kentucky is also an exceptional recruiter.
Dykeel Shorts, yes.
That first name's hard for me to recall. It's unique.
Yes. So a lot of coaching shakeups, obviously. And
there's more to come. There's going to be more to come. Obviously, when that defensive coordinator is named, whether it's Butler or somebody else, I guarantee you there's going to be some additional changes to the staff and expansion probably of the coaching staff. Because now you don't have to fire coaches. You can simply kind of put them on the shelf and let them find their own path to another job.
After the bowl game. But in terms of the defensive coordinator, I took a look at a couple articles that were talking about who that could be. So obviously, John Butler is one of the top candidates since he's filling the temp role right now. Phil Snow has been brought up because he has been serving as an analyst and advisor for us already this year. Though the probably one knock against him is that he's already in his 60s. Not necessarily a long-term solution. Then some other names that were bandied about were Scott Simons from SMU, Elijah Robinson from Syracuse, Jim Leonard, currently with the Broncos, but the former Wisconsin defensive coordinator, and Jeff Collins from North Carolina.
Yes. And, I don't know all of those guys. I mean, I'm familiar with Jim Leonard because of his time at Wisconsin. He was outstanding there. So I think that would be a great hire. The SMU guy is an interesting choice. But why would you leave SMU, a team that's in the playoffs this year and is in a conference that's frankly way more winnable than the Big Ten? Why would you leave there to come to Nebraska unless it was to, take a bigger paycheck?
Right. The bigger paycheck or, some sort of, family connection or whatever would be the two main reasons.
I don't think there is any there. So that SMU one, that guy does seem to have some buzz. There's certainly lots of people who feel like he would be a good fit.
Well, and I think that he has a past with Coach Rule. I think that was the other part of it.
Okay. And I don't know that detail, but anyway, that's, and then the North Carolina coach, of course, they just fired Mac Brown at North Carolina. So his whole staff is, of course, now kind of in limbo and looking for what's next for them. So that would be a natural thing. And then you said the Syracuse.
Yes.
That's interesting. I don't know why they would do that other than to have another 3-3-5 guy. I'm assuming that maybe the Syracuse guy who replaced Tony White remained a 3-3-5. Maybe he was an underling to Tony White. So you'd have some continuity in the philosophy if you hired somebody like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I like the idea of Jim Leonard because, as you say, he proved himself to be very capable against us when he was coaching against us, as the Wisconsin defensive coordinator.
Right.
But I think the main thing with him is, does he want to leave the NFL? He's not a defensive coordinator there currently. He is a defensive passing
Right.
assistant. So
Right.
he's, it would be maybe a increase in pay for him. But is he happy in the NFL?
Right. And it could be that he's discovered, because, he had actually been on the short list for a number of NFL teams in his final couple of years at Wisconsin, as a defensive coordinator at the NFL level. Right. And he passed on those opportunities, or they never materialized fully. I don't know which side of that it is, but that there was obviously mutual interest. The thing that makes him a good fit is he's been very successful within the Big Ten, right? He's not just a successful defensive coordinator. He's a successful defensive coordinator in the Big Ten, which means he understands how to stop the run and the importance of stopping the run first and foremost before you can, become a great defense. And he's all about physical play. Now he, remember, was the interim head coach at Wisconsin, and everybody expected him to
Right.
be the head coach at Wisconsin. So this is a guy that's went through quite the roller coaster on it from a career path standpoint. He was the star assistant, Broyles Award candidate type of defensive coordinator, and just having great success at Wisconsin, and then became the interim head coach, but then didn't get the head coaching job. And then was offered to be the defensive coordinator again at Wisconsin, but for obvious reasons, ultimately decided not to do that. And I think he thought at that point, well, heck, the previous year I had all these feelers for, NFL opportunities as a coordinator, right? But none came. Now maybe he interviewed for a few of them and just didn't interview well, or maybe, because at this time, the NFL is working really hard to get minority hires.
Mm.
So him being a middle-aged white guy, probably not the best thing if your goal is to be hired by an NFL franchise.
I see. And to clarify, the Syracuse guy does not have, or I'm sorry, the SMU guy does not have a past history with Matt Rule, but the Syracuse guy does. He was a former assistant at Baylor and Temple for defensive line. And he was at Texas A&M before he was at Syracuse. So he does have a solid resume to him.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would say Jim Leonard and the SMU guy are probably, a little more long shots. And then the other two, Elijah Robinson at Syracuse and Jeff Collins from North Carolina, are probably more reasonable. Then John Butler obviously has the chance to prove himself, potentially in this bowl game. And then Phil Snow, I know you had talked to me previously. You just thought he's probably too old to be kind of a long-term solution, right?
Well, I know that Rule most likely offered him the coordinator job first thing, and at that point in time, he had decided, no, I'm gonna just step away. He was ready maybe at that point to take a break or retire or whatever. And maybe now, because he's been out of the game for about a year and a half, other than doing consulting stuff, maybe he's got the bug again and has decided, no, I'm not done with this thing. I'm willing to be a coordinator again. And I think the ball is kind of a little bit maybe in his court. If he really wanted to express interest in a job, I have a feeling, because of their history and confidence in him, Matt Rule would take Snow back absolutely if Snow was ready to commit.
Right.
But I think Matt would paint the picture. Here's the reality of the new world of college football. It's been a while since you've been in it. Are you sure you want to do these things?
Right.
And behave in this way. And he may say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Right. So. And then lastly, we'll just mention on the national stage, it is relevant, of course, to Nebraska fans, that Scott Frost, our former head coach, has now been hired as the head coach of UCF, his former home before he came to Nebraska, where, of course, he had a great undefeated season right before we hired him. I saw some mixed reactions from UCF fans on that, like, oh, okay, he had one great season, but then, he's failed to, reach 500, in most of his other seasons or whatever. Are we looking back with rose-tinted glasses here? What's your thought on that one?
Well, I'm going to give Scott the benefit of the doubt. He was still a relatively young coach when he took the job at Nebraska. I think it's clear he was not prepared to be everything that Nebraska needed him to be, and his reaction to not having initial success was to kind of tank rather than to rise up and double down and try harder. And so the way that played out was not a good thing, but that doesn't mean that he can't learn, right, from that experience and become a better coach and a better leader of men and everything. So, and he clearly needed a new environment. So all of those things have happened. There's been some time to heal those wounds, but also for him to reflect. So I think he will be a way better coach. Now his record might not be the same because now UCF is in a Power 4 conference. They weren't last time, right? Now they're part of the Big 12, and so it's a bigger opportunity now for Scott Frost. And I think he's mature. He's matured, right? He's obviously older, and he's most people mature as they get older. So he might very well be just the right thing. And UCF is a sleeping giant. Right. I don't know if you know this or not, but it's the largest university in Florida.
Right.
It's bigger than Florida State, bigger than the University of Florida. It's a huge population. It's a huge campus. And it has lots of resources and lots of now wealthy alumni.
Right. And of course you have that recruiting place in Central Florida, which helps a lot.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Obviously things didn't work out at Nebraska with Scott, but I don't have hard feelings. I wish him success there.
Yeah, absolutely. At the first opportunity, some bowl game is going to seize on the opportunity to match up UCF with Nebraska in a bowl game in some future year, if we're lucky enough to win 6 games or more.
There we go. We gotta get there first. All right. So then in terms of the players situation, obviously the transfer portal opened up. So a lot of players have left the program for various reasons. And then we also had the signing period open up. So a lot of recruits have signed with us. So we're going to start with the recruiting updates. I'm just going to go through a big list of names here. We got a 4-star wide receiver, Cortez Mills. We got a great linebacker, Dawson Merritt. Quarterback TJ Lateef, wide receiver Jeremiah Jones, linebacker Christian Jones, wide receiver Isaiah Mosey, offensive lineman Sean Hammerbeck, defensive lineman Cade Pietrix, running back Connor Booth, and defensive lineman Tyson Terry. There were more, of course, but those are just some of the highlights I saw. A lot of people excited about the first 3 I mentioned: Cortez Mills, Dawson Merritt, and TJ Lateef.
Right.
So who stands out to you from that group, Dad?
Well, so here's the thing. TJ Lateef is really important because he's a quarterback. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, it's just going to be really hard to maintain a quarterback room in this day and age, right? And yet you need to have one because, as we discussed, I think on our last podcast, Alex, there's only been like 2 years out of the last 13 or 14 years in Nebraska football that our starting quarterback at the beginning of the year has made it through the season without injuries, right?
Right.
So you need to be 2 and 3 deep. There were times when we were playing against Iowa in the final game of the year with our 4th team quarterback, our guy that started the year as our 4th team quarterback.
Right.
So you got to have some depth at that position, and yet it's so hard to retain it when if you get 2 guys that are talented and they're close in age, if whoever loses that competition initially, the other guy leaves. They don't stick around, and that's the new reality of this portal era when you are a middling average or slightly below average team like Nebraska. Now, if you're competing for chances to go to the playoff or getting into this 12-team playoff, then maybe kids have a different perspective. They're willing to be the second teamer if they're playing for a potential champion, right?
Well, but
So
I remember you talked about that with Brian Clower, though, your friend who's a big Michigan fan, about how even they,
yeah,
even though they're a Power 5 top tier program who just went to the national championship, even they're having trouble keeping a solid quarterback room.
it really is tough. But then you had examples where they were. I mean, if you looked at Ohio State's quarterback room, they had an incredible list of quarterbacks, from both a high school accolade standpoint as well as experienced transfers and such. And they were able to retain those guys.
Right.
At least this year. At least this year that happened. So yeah. But the bottom line is tough. So quarterback TJ Latif is huge because he's a little more of a mobile quarterback. He's not an athlete quarterback. You know what I mean? He's definitely a thrower. He's got a great arm, quick release. I like his film a lot, but he is definitely more athletic and mobile than Dylan is. So he could represent a change of pace for us.
Right.
Now we have Harburg, who's kind of our athlete playing quarterback, but Matt Rule has already come out and acknowledged that he and Heinrich have had conversations about giving him the chance to try some other positions out where he might be a better fit for an NFL future. He's not likely to be an NFL quarterback. I mean, I think after 2 years of him being in the program, he'll be a junior next year. Heinrich, I think, has recognized the writing on the wall that he does not currently have the throwing skills and the vision, reading, progression skills to be an NFL caliber quarterback.
Yeah.
But
Well,
he is a freak athlete who could very easily be a defensive end or a tight end or an H-back type of player. I mean, he's got enough athleticism that he's got a variety of places he might be able to find a home.
well, kind of a sidetrack, but when I was with your brother AJ, Christian McCaffrey kind of came up in conversation, and I hadn't thought about him in a while. Of course, he was at Nebraska for a bit, so I looked him up. And he transferred to a different school to play quarterback because he wasn't getting enough opportunities with us. And then he ended up playing like running back or wide receiver at that school anyways, because, he was really fast and that was where his skill set was. And he did well at that and then is now playing in the NFL doing that. So,
right. And it's not Christian. Christian is his older brother who was a superstar at Stanford and has become a superstar running back in the NFL. Now, who you're talking about is Christian's brother,
Luke McCaffrey.
Luke McCaffrey.
Yes,
exactly.
that's what I meant.
And Luke,
yes.
yeah, and Luke was the one who went through that. Yeah, he transferred multiple times after leaving Nebraska, but found a home. Was asked and was willing at that point in his career to change positions from quarterback to wide receiver. Did so very successfully, and then that leveraged him into an NFL career.
Right. But yeah, since we're talking about the quarterback, we might as well talk directly about the fact that Danny Kalin, who was the third string quarterback this year, showed some promise in the spring game. The little bit we got to see him. He has
and he redshirted. And he redshirted.
He has transferred out of the program. So now we have TJ Latif as the freshman quarterback. And Rule has said that since Heinrich is going to be moving to a different position, they're looking to get a kind of transfer quarterback to kind of bring that quarterback room back up to 3 to be kind of in a healthy state.
Right. And we also have another kid whose name is escaping me right at the time. It starts with a G, but he was a guy that we discovered, at a camp this summer who had played for 3 years at the NAIA level and was the NAIA player of the year, national player of the year. And he came to Nebraska and just wowed the coaches with his, accuracy and his quick release and his good decision-making skills and stuff. And he basically was our emergency quarterback this year. and he has one more year of potential eligibility. He'd have to apply for it, but there's at least a reasonable chance he could get it. So he might be in the quarterback mix at Nebraska if he wants to be.
Jalen Gramstad.
Gramstad, that's it. Yep.
Yes.
And so he would be another guy. But the bottom line is you don't want to necessarily go into the season knowing that you're one snap away from Gramstad being your quarterback for the whole year. And to put the burden on TJ that he has to be ready to go on, day one is pretty tough to expect. I mean, even Dylan, um, um, wasn't guaranteed that was going to be the case, right? Now, Dylan was kind of exceptional in his maturity as far as understanding the game and things like that. So, but the bottom line is, I don't want TJ to have that burden on him. So, we do need a transfer quarterback for
Right.
sure. Now, the other two guys, getting back to the whole recruiting thing, are two players. One, Merritt, Dawson Merritt, was a guy that we went after very hard. His dad, I believe, is involved with the Kansas City Chiefs organization, and was a 4-star recruit from Kansas City, an area we have to begin to secure as a regular pipeline to Nebraska, and it hasn't necessarily been that. And he committed and was a commit of Alabama for many months, and then switched his commitment. So we got him to flip, a huge deal, right? And then similarly, Cortez Mills was another player who flipped his commitment on signing day, actually, or the day before signing day, and switched from Oklahoma to Nebraska. And he's a wide receiver, which we obviously need desperately to get some quality wide receivers in here to support Dylan. So that's why that's huge. But overall, we have a group of about 20 guys coming in from the freshman class, and it looks like a good group. Not a spectacular group, but way above average, and it's basically a top 20 recruiting class.
Right. Yep. I saw it was around that ranking. We have got a lot of 4-stars in this class, which is nice.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Now, in terms of the transfers, we'll go through a similar kind of list of names here of folks that are leaving the program. We've got Jamari Butler, Gabe Irvin, Princewell. I'm not going to pronounce his last name.
Umanyalan.
Yeah, that one. James Williams, Mikai Gabior.
Or
Yep. Davon Hall, Kay Wallen, Stefan Thompson, and Vincent Jackson. Once again, there were more, but those were some of the other names. The big one was that Emmett Johnson had announced that he would be going to the transfer portal, and then just a few days later retracted that and said that he'd be staying with Nebraska. So that was some good news.
Right. Well, it's a little scary that many of the people that you listed on that list, those aren't, disgruntled, seniors who are buried on the depth chart, or juniors that are buried on the depth chart behind younger players. A number of those players, and they're all of them along the defensive line and outside linebacker area. Okay, so we've been devastated in those areas by the initial wave of portal entries. We had another one today, Kiana Davis, who we were super high on as a defensive tackle. He was going to be, the next Ty Robinson for us, and more athletic. And so he's a sophomore, right? And he's leaving. He's gone into the portal. Now, it's a head scratcher. I don't understand why. I can't believe that all these guys think they're going to transfer and follow Pork Chop, follow the defensive lineman coach.
Terrence Knight.
Terrence. Yeah, Terrence. Yeah, his nickname's Pork Chop. That's what I was in my head. But anyway, they can't all go to Florida State, right? Because if they do, they'll just be behind somebody else there, right? I mean, you got to find the right fit. So some of these guys, I think, are going to do well. They're going to end up someplace else and may have great careers. That's all absolutely a possibility. But I'm going to say probably more than not, they're going to end up somewhere else and be in a very similar situation to where they were at Nebraska, where they're struggling to get, reps. They might get a few reps, in each game or whatever, but they won't emerge as the starter that they happen to be envisioning. And I just think they're getting some bad advice. Now, it's also possible that this advice is actually coming from Rule. That when a guy comes into him and says, hey, because honestly, that list you just gave me, Alex, 3 of those guys I expected to be starters next year for us, at least 3. And one of them is a current starter.
Right.
Okay. Butler and Jamari Butler blows me away. Why, if you have another year of eligibility, Jamari, you were a starter this year at Nebraska. Why the heck would you leave? Right? Do you really think you're going to get that much more money from somebody else? And maybe the answer to that is yes, because he's already got a final 3. He's already announced a final 3. Now, that's interesting because they're not even supposed to be having dialogue yet. But he already has a final 3 of LSU, Texas A&M, and some other school down south, but multiple SEC programs. So those are people that are that he seems to be convinced are willing to write a bigger check, or that he has a greater chance. What makes him think that if he can't be a standout star on the defensive line at Nebraska, that he's going to be able to do that at LSU or Texas A&M, who regularly recruit top 10 talent?
Right. But like you say, it could be kind of part of this new era where you go to a mid-tier, I know it hurts to call Nebraska mid-tier, but you go to a more mid-tier school,
Yep.
Try to have success there, and then go back on the market, as it were, and kind of, show off your highlight reel and say, hey, bigger school, come write me a check and pick me up.
And that might very well be what they're doing. And so that would suggest then, Alex, that the possibility exists that they may not like what they hear and ultimately say, well, maybe I have it better at Nebraska than I thought I did. And then, the call comes back to Matt Rule to say, hey, Matt, can I come back on the team?
Right.
Coach, can I come home?
Right.
And Matt has already demonstrated a willingness to do that once with Emmett.
Right.
And on the one hand, that's great. That shows a maturity of the relationship and understanding it's a business now, and you got to treat it as such, and blah 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 blah. But it's also a tacit encouragement for players to do that every year, right? Like any player that has a reasonably successful year, like the James Williams, okay, as a defensive end for us, he's had 5.5 sacks in basically, a year and a half of football. Okay. Nebraska took him on a flyer from a junior college. We gave him a chance no one else would give him. And he repays us by leaving, after and even this year, it was very clear he was not a complete defensive lineman. He could not play on all downs. He could not play. He was not a 3-down, 4-down player. He was a pass rushing specialist. He was so bad against the run that we kind of had to hide him or get him off the field in those situations, right?
Right.
He was only on the field when it was pretty clear they were likely to be passing. So he's not even a complete player for his role yet, and he seems to think he's worth a lot more somewhere else, or that he's going to get developed better somewhere else. And these are conversations that I would love to have with these kids to understand where their heads are at, because I think they're getting some bad advice, and or they're being encouraged, maybe even by Matt Rule, go out, see what your market can get you. I get it. It's a business. I'm not going to dissuade you from doing that. Go ahead. And then Matt's going to do that with a confidence that they're going to find out that they got it pretty good at Nebraska. And when they come back to have that follow-up conversation, Matt will resell them on staying at Nebraska.
Right. Now, I thought this was a good tweet by Mitch Sherman, who was just basically doing the math on, the returning players on our roster, the incoming signees, the anticipated portal additions. And basically he came up with that there are 42 players that must depart Nebraska to reach the 105 roster limit, right? So
Right.
we're going to have some kids transfer out of the portal, that we don't want to lose, just to get to that 105 roster limit. And to your point, these kids who are going out and kind of selling their wares in the portal, that's all well and good that you want to come back, and maybe we want you to come back, but you can't wait too long, right?
Right. Exactly. Well, and so here's the thing. Yeah. No, excuse me. That's a whole nother discussion now, Alex, about the 105 roster limit and what that does, particularly to a program like Nebraska. Understanding that we were carrying between 140 and 152 players almost all season. That is probably the largest roster in the United States certainly among the Power Four, right?
Right.
So we have the longest path to get to the 105. Now, Coach Rule genuinely, I think, believed that the NCAA was going to give teams multiple years to get to the 105. And, basically saying, okay, the roster limit for year one is going to be 125. And then year two, it's going to be 115. And then year three, it's going to be 105, so that they could have allowed some of these older students who were on the team to not have to be kicked off just because of numbers, and allow them to kind of matriculate out of college and go away, right? Move on with life. But nope, they said nope. Their decision was it's 105 and it's immediate. So now what is Matt going to do? And he's been warning us. Matt Rule has been warning the fan base and the media for a long time now that this is going to be tough, and that you're going to see some people leave that you don't want to see leave. And the problem is the concentration of defensive linemen that have left. I've spent the whole year, Alex, saying we didn't have enough big boys, right? We did not have enough defensive linemen. And that's why I hated the 3-3-5, because although it has all this flexibility, if you're going to have a 3-3-5, you still have to have enough depth of big boys that you can switch to a 4-3 or even a 5-2 when you need it, right? To stop the run in the Big Ten when it's windy outside and cold, i.e. Iowa, right?
Right.
And I was frustrated all year that we did not have that depth. We had great starters, but beyond that, there was a huge drop off. And now that depth that has to step up because our starters are going to be gone, they're gone too, because they all went to the portal because our defensive line coach left us before the bowl game. I mean, it is I just wish we could get a break at some point where some things actually went in our favor, right? And this is just another example of that. If you wanted to write the script for what couldn't happen in Nebraska, if they hoped to have a reasonable degree of expectation of success at the bowl game, these are the kinds of things that you would have written into that script. Right. Lose all your defensive line, including your starter. Okay. Right now, I'm hopeful that we'll have 2 of our 3 starters still in the game, but we've lost some of our starting linebackers. We've lost one of our starting linemen, and we've lost our coordinator and our D-line coach. I mean, what are the chances that we play well defensively in this bowl game?
Right. Yeah. No, it is a weird situation for sure. For us to have to, our first bowl game in so many years, and then you have all this chaos behind the scenes to deal with as well.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that more next week. We'll give our proper predictions for everything. We should briefly mention, of course, that it was announced that we will be playing in the Pinstripe Bowl as we predicted in New York. It's the Bad Boy Mowers Pinstripe Bowl on the 28th of December in New York City, and it is being played against Boston College, who's 7-5 this year.
Yeah, not really a bad matchup. I mean, if you look at the bowl game matchups for the Big Ten, that's probably one of the more attractive ones that we could have taken, unless we were willing to go lower in the pecking order and switch with Rutgers or something. And Rutgers wouldn't have switched with us because I think they played in the Pinstripe Bowl last year, so they wouldn't have wanted to go back to the same bowl game, especially since they're from New Jersey. So It's actually not a bad thing. I mean, I don't know that it's going to generate an enormous attendance from Nebraska fans from the state of Nebraska to go to New York City in December, but it's a pretty cool place to go, to be able to go to Rockefeller Center and see the Christmas tree, and what I want to say, Manhattan at Christmas time is a pretty magical place, right? So there's a lot of cool things to see, and you're only going to be there for a week. And yes, it's not sunny beach weather, but you know what? Nashville wasn't going to be sunny beach weather either, and that was the other possibility, right? Nashville, Tennessee. So all in all, other than the fact that the players are going to have to play in likely pretty frigid conditions, they're going to get a play in a historic, New York Yankees baseball stadium, and have a really unique experience.
Right. Well, I know we were speculating earlier about who our bowl game opponent could be, and there was possibilities where we might have had to play, like an SEC school or a higher ranked Big 12 school or something like that.
Right.
So like you say, from a perspective of winning the bowl game, Boston College is a pretty reasonable opponent.
Yeah, I would agree. They were tied for 7th, I think, in the ACC. So about the same spot. I mean, we might have been 9th or 8th in the Big Ten. So really, pretty comparable from that standpoint as far as seasonal performance.
Right.
So, but we're immediately, I think, at a huge disadvantage because of what's happened on our portal entries.
Right.
All these guys that are leaving.
Yeah.
Which they don't make sense to me.
They don't make sense. Alrighty. And then we'll quickly mention the women's volleyball team. We were ranked officially number 2 in the NCAA tournament. And so the brackets come out for that, and the teams have played their first few games. So we went 3-0, both with Florida A&M and with Miami in our first 2 games. And now this week we have a game against number 23 ranked Dayton. And then if we win that, most likely against Wisconsin for our 3rd time playing them this year. So I know, we played pretty well in those first 2 games. We should be able to beat Dayton, but that Wisconsin matchup, even though we're up 6-0 in sets on them this year, I know you're worried about that one.
Oh yeah. Well, and the thing is with Dayton, they're going to be a unique out for us because they're not like a typical Big Ten school. They have these athletic, high-flying, attackers, right? Where we're used to seeing 6'3", 6'4" outside hitters. Their best player by far is a great athlete who is just an amazing jumper, and she's only 5'8", but she leads. She was Player of the Year in the Atlantic 10 conference that they're a part of. I think it's the Atlantic 10, and was just phenomenal player. She had 30 kills or 27 kills in the last match against Baylor. She's phenomenal. And so it's going to present a unique challenge, because what happens when you have somebody that can jump that high, Alex, this is a good little explanation of volleyball. Even if the person who's attacking can't get as high as the taller defenders who are setting the block, but if they can jump higher, then they have more time in the air. And then if they can then delay their contact with the ball until the block is starting to come down, right? Because they've already reached their peak and they're already gravity is starting to push them back to earth, and she's still up in the air. Then all of a sudden she can attack the hands, because they have to pull those hands back to not touch the net. And so it makes it really hard to block somebody like that. That's why some of these smaller attackers can have enormous success against taller defenders. And she's great at it because she's had to do it her whole life. And so it doesn't bother her that the people across the net are 6 inches taller than her, because she's been doing that her whole career, and she's damn good at it. So it'll be an interesting matchup for us, but it's one that collectively we should win that match. And I think with a high degree of confidence, we should. So that gets us to most likely having to play Wisconsin for a chance to go to the Final Four.
Yep. So I'm going to be positive and say that we win both those matches and we do make it to the Final Four once again. We'll obviously talk about that on our podcast next week and see how the ladies are doing.
Yep, I'm very hopeful, but I can't state with that kind of confidence that you have.
Of course not. All righty. And then in the world of national college football, of course, we had the conference championship games this past weekend. We'll quickly mention two of the kind of lesser games. Boise State beat UNLV in their second matchup of the year in the Mountain West. Boise won 21-7, so they secured their spot in the college football playoff. Though interestingly, I looked at the play-by-play for that one, and Boise didn't score in the whole second half. They got those 21 points in the first half. So that doesn't necessarily bode well for their offensive capabilities in the playoff.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that when they're going to have a step up in competition eventually, that might make things interesting for them.
Yeah.
But they have some individual skill talent that's special at Boise State. And those players, if they continue to play at the remarkable level that they've been playing, might very well be able to make just enough plays to win a football game.
Yeah. And then in the MAC, my alma mater, Ohio University, is playing against our rival, Miami of Ohio. And from what I saw, most of the experts were picking Miami of Ohio to win that game, except for Timothy Chalamet, who was on the ESPN pregame show, and he predicted Ohio. And then they ended up crushing Miami of Ohio 38-3, just running it all over them. I saw a couple option plays in the highlights that were pretty nice. As their first MAC championship game, or MAC championship win, I should say, since like the 50s. So it's a pretty big deal down there.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was 68, but regardless, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. Maybe it was 68. Yeah. So that was pretty cool to see. And then in the Big 12, we had Iowa State versus Arizona State. On the previous podcast, I predicted that Arizona State would win 35-32. Well, you predicted that they would win by a bigger margin, 35-17. And turns out you were more correct. It actually was a little bit bigger. It was 45-19. They proved to be very dominant. Later in the game, Iowa State started turning the ball over. They had 3 turnovers, which of course gave Arizona State the opportunity to really put up the score. It was a closer game in the first half. And their great running back, Scadaboo, had 170 yards rushing it. I sent you one particular play where he looked like Tommy Frazier just breaking 5 tackles. That was very impressive.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to enjoy watching Scadaboo again when they play in their first round. Or no, they're not for.
Yeah, they get the bye.
Round? Yeah, they got the bye. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when they play again, it'll be interesting to see.
Definitely. And then Penn State versus Oregon. I predicted that Oregon would win. I said 35-28, and you went the opposite way, picking Penn State 28-24. And I will say, I think you were right on Penn State's attendance. I did see a lot of white jerseys in the crowd there, but Oregon ended up taking that one in a very high-scoring game, 45-37.
Yep. But again, with Penn State with an opportunity, to tie the score, if their final drive had culminated in a touchdown, they would have been able to come back. There were times in that game where it looked like it was going to be a blowout, but Penn State just kept hanging in. It was actually entertaining game.
It was. Well, yeah. At one point, it was 28-10 Oregon, so it was looking like it might be a blowout. But Penn State came back, even though they threw an interception at their own 20-yard line, which basically gave Oregon a free touchdown. So that was pretty devastating. But they ended up having 297 rushing yards in the game, which is very impressive.
Yes.
So, entertaining game. Actually, pretty much aside from that Iowa State game, all of the major conference championship games were entertaining, which was fun to watch this weekend. And then we'll also talk here about Texas versus Georgia and the SEC. I predicted that Georgia would win 24-17, while you predicted they would win a little more narrowly, 28-27. And once again, you were more correct in terms of the score. because it ended up going Georgia's way 22-19 in overtime. That was a particularly crazy game, frankly ugly game. Both teams had turnovers. Georgia had 2, Texas had 3, and Carson Beck, Georgia's quarterback, got hurt at the end of the half, and they had their second team quarterback Stockton come in, who actually had a nice drive to get them some points right away in the second half, and kind of gave their offense the spark that it needed. Although then he later in the game had a very bad interception that let Texas score the touchdown or the points rather, that got them to go into overtime. If he didn't throw that interception there, and I think they could have kicked a field goal and they would have been up by 6, I believe, if that had happened. So it made it harder for Texas to make the comeback.
Correct. I agree. But what blew me away watching that game, and we were even texting about this, Alex, was the similarities between that early on and the Nebraska-Iowa game, where Texas was being absolutely dominant for the first half, and Georgia could not move the ball if their lives depended on it. They were just completely getting shut down by Texas's defense, and Texas seemed to be moving the ball with quite comfort against a very good Georgia defense, but Georgia defense would find ways, or Texas would self-destruct in ways that would keep them from scoring points.
Yes, yeah, they kept selling for field goals.
Yeah, well, I mean, they missed the field goal, right? Like, so,
right.
I think there was one missed field goal in there too. So,
I knew that was going to kind of keep Georgia in the game, and that turned out to be the case. So that was another entertaining one.
Yeah.
And then that leaves the ACC for last, which was proving to be the most consequential, because we knew that if Clemson won that one, then that would leave SMU with 2 losses, one of which having been gained in that conference championship game, and that would make things interesting for the committee. Whereas if SMU won, Clemson would definitely be out, with them already having 3 losses going into the game, and that would have left the door pretty wide open for Alabama to make it into the playoff game. So we were both, I know, rooting for Clemson there. I predicted that Clemson would win that game 30-20, while you predicted that SMU would win in a narrow one 28-27. And so it did end up going Clemson's way, but in a more narrow score of 34-31.
Right. So, yep. And really, SMU had its chances, right? I mean, there were they were behind. Clemson was playing better, but then SMU found a way to right themselves, and they came a storming back, and it looked like they might be going to take it,
Yeah.
Well, and then they just kind of fell short.
Yeah, similar to that Texas game, except Clemson did actually get some points up on the board. It was 24-7 at halftime, but SMU made some good adjustments, started having success on offense, and then tied up the game, and then let Clemson get a really nice punt return that then gave them good yardage to kick a 56-yard field goal at the end of that game to go up into that 3-point win. So it was, as dramatic as you could get. Of course, and their young kicker is never going to have to buy a beer in that town again. I can tell you that.
Right. Exactly right. Freshman. He's not old enough to drink. So, Alex, that's not going to happen yet. I'm sure of it.
No, never.
But yeah, that guy is a legend that no one's ever going to forget that.
Well, and I was worried, and I texted you at the time because, like I said, it was 24-7. It looked like SMU might get blown out. And so even there, if Clemson won, but SMU, looked totally incompetent while trying to hang in there with this more talented team, then that would have really hurt their argument for making it into the playoff over Alabama. But they hung in there. They made the comeback. They were, one 56-yard field goal at the very end away from going into overtime, right, and having a chance to win. So it played out very well for those of us who wanted to see some interesting discussions and debates happen for that college football playoff.
Right. Well, it definitely forced that committee to show its hand. And so now they're going to be able to, they were going to be openly criticized no matter what decision they made. But now the hand has been shown. It has highlighted the imperfection of the system that they currently have in place for choosing the participants in the playoff, and it's going to drive a lot of discussion going forward.
Right. And you and I chatted quite a bit afterwards about like all the implications and even beyond who makes it in, but like where the team's ranked, because, who's 3 and 4 between Boise State and Arizona State, where do they rank Notre Dame, who didn't play in a conference championship game, but obviously deserves to be in the top 12, where do they get ranked? And that changes up who they then have to play in the follow-up, where you're almost kind of incentivized to want maybe a bit of a lower ranking, so then you might play Boise State ranked 3 or Arizona State ranked 4 rather than number 1 ranked Oregon or number 2 ranked Georgia, right? If you're feeling good that you'll be able to beat your first round opponent, then your second round opponent looks a lot more appetizing to you, right? So there's all sorts of weird strategic kind of competitive advantages there.
Absolutely. And you look at how it actually lined up, and I'm sure we're going to go through it here in a second, but yeah, I mean, these kind of rules that were decided upon, where the conference champions were going to automatically get these buys, right? That is some crazy stuff, right? So you've got some matchups that look to be very favorable for teams that aren't necessarily the highest ranked teams.
Right.
It just happens to be how they fell in to the bracket situation. And here's something for you. I don't know if you're looking at that list in front of you right now, Alex. Okay. I believe that and I don't know if like Vegas does this or not, but if you look at all 12 teams and you had to predict not who was going to win the national championship, but who are the 2 teams that are going to play for the national championship, who are the 2 teams that you think would have the highest, or would be set as the odds-on favorites by Vegas, based on that the way it's structured,
right?
That bracket, because I'm pretty sure I know who I think they would be.
I mean, looking at it right now, I would say Oregon, Texas definitely have to be up there.
Well, but Oregon and Texas, I think, are going to play each other before that, so they can't be in the finals.
Well, right. Well, I'm just saying in general.
Look at the well. I'm not talking in general. I'm talking specifically how this played out. If you look at that list, right?
Okay. Well, then I guess I would say Texas for sure. And then, I mean, I guess going off of what you're suggesting, you might say Texas and Penn State have a good path, as well as Oregon and Georgia. I think those are the 4 teams that stand out to me.
Absolutely. And so if Vegas was setting the odds, I'm fairly certain it would be Texas and Georgia. So we're going to go through all of this stuff, and we're going to end up with an all SEC national championship game. For the 3rd time. They will be facing each other for the 3rd time in one season, which just blows me away.
Right. Yeah. 3rd matchup. Although, if that is actually how it plays out here, you got to give it to them, because, Texas will have had to play, 3 rounds of games, to get to that point to play Georgia. Right. So clearly, they prove themselves on the field if they do that.
Oh, I know. Well, and that's where right now, none of the formulas or anything take into consideration, as much as people hate to hear the whiny Lane Kiffin. Okay. His point about quality of opponents, quality of rosters, environments that they play in, all of these factors that should be entered into evaluating a team's performance that are currently not. Okay. Because those are things that you can't necessarily put a number in necessarily. They're a feel thing. They're your eyeballs. If you're a really knowledgeable football guy, which is what that committee should be filled with, then those committee members should be able to look at it and recognize what they're looking at.
Yeah.
And know that there's a big difference between what they're seeing when they're seeing Boise State play against whoever they're playing, UNLV or whatever, versus what they're seeing athletically when they watch Georgia play Texas in the SEC championship game, or Oregon play
Right.
Penn State.
Right. Well, okay. So let's real quick just go over what the committee did decide, which was that
Yes.
you have number 1 Oregon, number 2 Georgia, number 3 Boise State, number 4 Arizona State, which all made sense because Arizona State was ranked above Clemson, who then won their championship game. Arizona State has 2 losses, Clemson has 3, so that made sense. Boise State only had 1 loss, so they're ranked above Arizona State, so that all basically made sense. Then the interesting part was the other 8 teams. So they ranked then number 5 Texas, number 6 Penn State, and number 7 Notre Dame, which that was one thing when I saw projected brackets, there were some fluctuations there. Like you could argue, does Notre Dame deserve to be above them? But I'm glad that even though those are the 2 teams that lost their conference championship games, the committee stayed true to its word that it was not going to punish teams for playing in their conference championship game and getting an extra loss because they lost. And obviously both games were very competitive, as we just described. So I was glad to see that.
Me too. I was very glad to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, number 5 and number 6, right, that sets those 2 teams up to play against Boise State and Arizona State. So being that versus number 7, Notre Dame, who's seeded to go up play against Georgia in the second round, right? There's a big difference there. So you've got number 7, Notre Dame, then number 8, Ohio State, number 9, Tennessee. So kind of the third best from both the SEC and the Big Ten playing against each other there. And then number 10, Indiana from the Big Ten. Number 11, SMU. So SMU getting in there, not Alabama. And number 12 being Clemson, the champion, which is funny, of course, the fact that SMU lost to Clemson, but they're ranked above them in the rankings. So that's a little funny. But basically they, said on the big talk show where this was all announced that SMU proved themselves in their conference championship game, and Alabama having 3 losses within their conference, including to some mediocre teams like Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. That was too much for them to overcome, even though they did play against more top 25 teams than SMU did and things like that.
Right. And here's the thing. You got to look at SMU's the content of their whole season. And given the things they do now, which is overvalue win-loss record and undervalue who you're actually playing, then that is the right course of action, right? That's what they've done historically, and so they're being consistent, I would say, in that regard. Now, you can argue, and I think there's a good argument to be said, that there needs to be some way to factor in that realization of the kind of talent that Alabama was facing week in and week out versus the kind of talent that was being faced by SMU's schedule or Indiana's schedule, for that matter.
Right. But I will say, because that has been the debate, right? If they put Alabama in, they would be kind of killing conference championship games. If they put SMU in, they're killing, strength of schedule. But I think that killing strength of schedule argument is overblown. And allow me to point to 2 pieces of evidence I saw online to kind of illustrate that point. So you have a Texas team that ends up 11-2, along with an SMU team that's 11-2. Both are 0-2 versus top 25 teams. Texas's best win is against an 8-4 Texas A&M, while SMU's best win is against a 9-3 Duke. Right. So that just goes to show you, the SEC isn't so fully loaded with all these great top 25 wins. And this other person said, why are we talking about incentivizing scheduling in regards to a Bama that scheduled 3 cupcakes and a Wisconsin program that hasn't won 10 games since before COVID? They lost to bad teams from their own league. Find a new take.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, especially on the take with Alabama. I don't believe Alabama was, one of the 12 best teams anyway, because of what you just described. I mean, they lost to Oklahoma and they lost to Vanderbilt. enough said, right? But again, if I were to say assign or put Duke in a bowl game against Texas A&M, what are the odds, right? What are the guys that really analyze this stuff more than anybody else? The bookmakers. What would they do?
All right.
And I'm fairly confident A&M would be the favorite in that matchup. So that win by Texas over A&M is
Right.
is significant, right? Texas also played uh, 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 against a Michigan team, which at the time was the defending national champions, right? And obviously, as you saw late in the season, had some real talent. The talent on that Michigan team, even though their record wasn't very good and they struggled to find their best version of themselves, the talent and the environment that Texas had to go in and beat Michigan in the big house, that's a big deal.
Right. Well, but I actually think this season is a great example of why football isn't, based on paper and stats, right? It's what you play on the
Right.
field. I don't
Absolutely.
know this for certain, but I would bet that Vegas's success rate this particular season is lower than it's been in quite some time because there were so many upsets this year. Remember how Georgia Tech took this Georgia team that's now, won the SEC into 8 overtimes, and was up on
Right.
them and very well should have won, and I doubt that anybody in Vegas had Georgia Tech winning that one. And yet they
Right.
almost did, right? So to
Right.
me, that's the part that I'm excited about with this playoff is that we get to see it
Yep.
on the field, right? Okay, SMU, okay, Boise State, okay, Arizona State, you have the chance to prove it. Now, if
Right.
we see this in practice and those teams like universally get blown out, then it will strengthen, like you say, Lane Kiffin's argument. But
Yep.
I'm hopeful that at least, one or two of those we see some upsets or at least very close games, and it will kind of justify the power of still making college football a regional sport where you try to get all the conferences involved rather than
Yes.
just focusing on the tippity top.
And I agree with you on that, Alex. And I know I'm going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I've been using the Vegas analogy to get them to understand they have to be more transparent, and they have to say what you just said effectively, which is the goal of this is not to get the 12 best teams in this playoff. The goal is to get approximately the 12 best teams in the playoff, with the caveats that we want to make sure that we have reasonable representation from all the major conferences in the country, so that we have a representative sample of the entire collective of football teams for that season from all these conferences, because conferences vary from year to year. Some years they're loaded with senior laden talent, senior laden quarterbacks, and they're exceptionally good. And then other years they're not, right? And there is an ebb and flow. And to keep the sport from becoming exclusively about basically two conferences, it would be in their best interest in terms of television revenue, in terms of longevity of the sport, um, as a national institution. You need Big 12 representation. You need a group of 5 represented. Those are rules that are worth keeping for the purposes of the long-term viability of the sport, right? Um, but say that. Don't don't try to manipulate it and act like you're getting the 12 best, when then there is all these exposures that you put to yourself. Does that make sense?
Right.
I just wish they would just be more transparent about it and say, listen, we're putting SMU in there because they played in the conference championship game, you know, uh, and you have to acknowledge I'm ignoring the fact that Clemson just last week lost to a South Carolina team that was like the 5th or 6th best team in the SEC.
Yeah. Well, and another aspect, right, was that under the 14 playoff, we saw a lot of the same matchups, right, year after year. But I saw
Right.
this nice illustration by a fan. Clemson, Texas has never happened. Ohio State, Tennessee has happened once. Penn State, SMU has happened twice. Indiana, Notre Dame has happened 29 times, but not since 1991.
There you
So
go.
there you go. We're getting all these interesting matchups, right? You know,
Yep.
and teams that
Yep.
don't usually get the national spotlight. You know, and I've seen a lot of excitement about that around
Yeah.
the college football world.
Well, and that's why you play the games. Ultimately, at least one of these games probably is not going to go the way I or you or collectively most, college football fans think they're going to go. Somebody's going to quote quote pull an upset or play better than expected and make a game tighter, even if the likely favorite ends up winning anyway. But it's like, okay, you thought this team was way better than that team, and yet they had to fight tooth and nail to the last, second of the game to win.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that stuff. I just want them to be transparent about it, and then put a structure in place and people in place who have the knowledge of the game to make those decisions properly, right?
Right.
And there are people out there that have that knowledge. You have to get them to agree to participate in this committee.
Right. Um, well, and the other thing I was talking about with you was that, this playoff, was kind of spliced onto the previous contract. So it's already up in like 2 years' time.
Right.
So they'll kind of have a chance to renegotiate it, on the various power players. I'm sure will be trying to push their agendas. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
one thing that will definitely come up is like, okay, we have to have the 4 buys because we have 12 teams, but the 4 buys should not be, the top 4 ranked
Automatic.
conference champions. They should
Right.
be just whoever the committee decides are the top 4 ranked teams, right? Because if you did that this year, Arizona State and Boise State definitely would not be in there. And
Correct.
not just basically would say they're still guaranteed to make it in to the playoff, but you're not guaranteed the bye. I think that
Correct.
is something that I could see happening.
But the Big 12 and the ACC probably will fight tooth and nail not to allow that to happen. In fact, I know they did fight tooth and nail. That's why that exists. Because
Right.
without that, their fear was that they would eventually get completely squeezed out. Right? I mean, if you didn't have that conference championship mean something by giving that bye to them, the conference champions, I mean, then it would have been much easier for justification to say, well, the number 1 and number 2 Big Ten teams should be in there, and the number 1 and number 2 SEC teams should be in there because the eyeball test says those are the 4 best teams,
Well,
and so we're
sure.
just going to do that.
But on the other hand, right, the ACC didn't get a bye at all because of how
Right.
things played out this year. Clemson, got in at the 12th, right? But
Right.
because of, how that all played out, they actually ended up with 2 teams. None of them have the
Mhm.
bye, but they've got 2 teams in there,
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think guaranteeing that their conference champion still makes it in no matter what, still gives them buy-in into the system.
I agree.
But I would agree that they would definitely protest, having the buys taken away. But once again, how this plays out in the next 2 years, like if there are these upsets or if, there aren't, and we get games like Georgia versus TCU, from 2 years ago, that will determine a lot.
Exactly. Well, and that's where the arguments and the finger pointing will come into play, and then of course the power of the ugly 4-letter word ESPN will also end up playing into this, and that's the part that probably is the most evil and just sinister of all of them, because they are worried about their product and the product that they represent, and that's where ultimately I'm always on guard on any of these negotiations as it relates to the Big Ten, because the SEC has got one goal, and that is to maximize their product and minimize the Big Ten, because that's not their product. And to me, having that partner, quote, at the table and having the influence that it does is a very, very bad thing.
Right. But once again, on the side of the interesting matchups and, not just focusing on the SEC and the Big Ten or whatever, you've got this
Right.
matchup of number 10 Indiana, number 7 Notre Dame, right, in South Bend at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
A matchup, like we
Yep.
said, that hasn't happened in over 30 years, this in-state rivalry. I saw a figure that, like, the tickets for that game are already astronomically high.
I bet. I bet.
So you're going to get some very exciting matchups for sure.
Oh yeah. I love the way this is played out. The only criticism I would have is that as I look at the brackets, it does appear that ironically some of the teams that are not necessarily the highest ranked teams in the seeding are going to have the potentially easiest path to get into the finals.
Right.
And so it'll be interesting to see if that actually ends up panning out that way.
Well, the one of the narratives we talked about beforehand was like the whole, I don't want to play in a conference championship game because I don't want to lose and then be left out.
Right.
And I think
Right.
the committee this year assuaged those fears.
It did. Well, and then I think that justifies why they did it the way they did it.
Right.
I just think they need to say that is why we're doing it, and that's why it's important.
But on the other hand, I would almost say the counterintuitive incentive they may have made is that you almost want to lose your conference championship game because it gives you an easier perhaps path to make it further in the playoff.
Well, again though, Alex, this year particularly, even though it's the first year, created a very unique circumstance. How many years over the last 10 years of the 4-game playoff, if in any of those years it had been a 12 team, how many of those years would the ACC champion have been lower than the best group of 5 team?
Right. Yeah, that's true.
It wouldn't have been, right? So this year was a rather unique year in that you had a Boise State who who had an exceptional season within the group of 5, and you had an ACC and an SEC that kind of self-destructed, right? Both of those conferences did not have a dominant team where there was one team that was clearly better than the rest.
Well, and the Big 12 too. Big 12 cannibalized itself.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, I mean, they almost got lucky that Arizona State won that game because I think, well, then they proved it. If somehow Iowa State had been able to not, it could have very easily been Iowa State playing somebody other than Arizona State, say a BYU or something, and then they beat BYU. And I don't think much of BYU this year, so I would have, you know what I mean? Then all of a sudden you have an Iowa State team that's I think a step below Arizona State, and they would have been the conference champions in this particular year. So that's where the compromise that was made. This whole set of rules is effectively a compromise to get everyone to buy in, so that this thing could happen.
Yeah. Well, like you say, overall, we were worried, but I'm happy with what the committee ended up deciding, and I think we've got some interesting matchups. Next week, we will talk about those playoff games, the initial round of playoff games, and give our official predictions, along with, of course, the Nebraska game, the other major bowl games. We've got Alabama, Michigan again, which is quite fun this year. So, and of course, we expect that there'll be even more updates on the Nebraska football front by next week, so we'll talk about that as well.
And so now, as a final cherry on top for this discussion about the conference or the tournament, the Champions Tournament, everybody should watch SEC Shorts version of this story. If you don't know where that is, look it up on
YouTube,
Instagram, or TikTok.
Yep, or YouTube. Yeah,
YouTube.
I knew you would like the bit where Alabama's going for the flag and they've got ESPN and SEC bias by their side.
Yes, exactly. I love it.
Yes,
I love it.
Yeah, they're good folks. All righty. Well, if you out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts if you search for College Football Throwdown. You can leave us a rating or review there. We always love hearing feedback from the fans. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.